All too often, it is said that Africans, outside of Kemet, did not contribute meaningfully to history. Not only is that statement erroneous from north to south, from origin sciences to religion, but it is also false from the recent past to the ancient past. There is a large body of evidence that shows the exact opposite, and that is that 1, multiple civilizations in the ancient past, well within the interior of the continent, had extraordinarily complex civilizations, and 2, that, in fact, record shows that civilization migrated north from the interior of the continent before arriving in the Nubio-Kemetic complex. And 3, by making such claims, it tries to exclude ancient Egypt Kemet from the rest of African achievements. And today we will see one such example of a newly discovered archaeological site that shows exactly what we are talking about. It is only through a diligent study of the past that one can perceive a mosaic of the self. Before we begin, we have to understand 2 important factors that have made it virtually impossible for modern classical historical studies to easily reconstruct the ancient African past. 1. The extensive use of mud throughout ancient African history has meant that few, if any, have survived. We have already covered in a previous video why Africans predominantly chose mud for building over stones. There are so many advantages to building with mud in Africa that it would have been backwards to choose any other material. I won't cover the full documentary here, but in short, it is strong, it is economical, it is practical. The other main reason why ancient African history is difficult to study is that Africans saw history as a living science, and oral history was favored. So much so that Africans invented a whole profession for it, a living, walking, singing wise man that is called the griot. Just like the ancient Greek oral tradition, the griot was a veritable history book that would travel from town to town, educating people about their past. With a touch of embellishment, of course. However, this wasn't the case everywhere. Oh, and one more thing. For those who didn't know, the great majority of African constructions that survived through history were systematically destroyed by Europeans during the colonial era. This was deliberate in order to justify their mistreatment at the time. Because one cannot publicly justify the morality of mistreating another human being unless it removes his or her humanity first. Today we will visit one of the recent archaeological discoveries that show Africans' architectural prowess in the ancient past. And towards the end, we will show other examples, seldom covered, that clearly dispel the myth that Africans cannot and did not build anything. The ancient city of Doukki Gel in modern-day Sudan. These recently discovered ruins in southern Sudan are fascinating archaeologists. Situated less than 1 kilometer away from the Nubian site of Kerma, they display an intricate architecture unseen until now. It now stands as one of the oldest historical sites in Africa, dating back 4,000 years. Kerma was one of the most ancient archaeological sites of ancient Nubia. It housed thousands of dwellings and tombs, and throughout Kemetic history, Nubia was the refuge of Lower Nile Kemetic dwellers, whenever invaders, foreign to their culture, would encroach. Nubia is where Egyptians went to rekindle their culture, but was also their ancestral home. It is therefore very interesting to find another civilization, bordering Kerma with a completely distinctive culture. One that was peopled by populations further south of Nubia, but equally impressive, not just in its size, but also in its intricacy. Increasingly, important archaeological discoveries are being made in sub-Saharan Africa. Give us a like and leave a comment if you want us to cover more of this type of content. In 2018, a Sudanese archaeological mission discovered an ancient urban complex with the largest building holding more than 1,400 columns. These gigantic constructions clearly point to a very sophisticated society. with a very distinctive sub-Saharan architecture as evidenced by the circular motifs. This site was named Doukki Gel. The area was occupied in 5000 BC, but it isn't until 2000 BC that it emerges as a true city and a veritable trading center bordering the Central African civilizations and the Nubio-Kemetic civilization complex. Look at the sheer size of the unearthed constructions. Some of its mesmerizing buildings and temples are well over 100 meters wide, with towering walls and support structures. For comparisons, the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, which existed in the same period, were 40 to 50 meters in size. Archaeologist Charles Bonnet, who was part of the team that excavated the site, attests that these urban centers began flourishing around 2000 BC. By 1450 BC, Doukki Gel had become an important military commercial hub, and encroachment from its northern neighbor from the Nubio-Kemetic civilization complex started to increase. This caused the inhabitants of Doukki Gel to build very sophisticated defensive structures that they incorporated into their castles and temples. In its principal buildings, you can see the semicircular stands towering the outside walls and fake entrances, a perfect setup for archery defense. This was in addition to the city's outside defensive walls. The main palace housed alleyways leading to a three-chairs throne, all of them with different height, implying a hierarchy of its ruling class. In Doukki Gel, almost all of the important buildings had circular motifs, while Kerma had a distinctive Nubio-Kemetic architecture. Their building technique is said to be from the south, deeper in Central Africa. Many Nubian texts allude to a coalition of peoples, deeper from the interior of Africa, that banded together to try and counter Nubio-Kemetic influence. Here, this 3D reconstruction also shows their original defensive structures. These fortifications are the largest anywhere along the Nile. They attest to the strength of the neighbors to the north, but also to the military adaptation of the different culture Nubians to the south. Another 3D reconstruction shows an assortment of temples. This type of architecture is not seen anywhere else in the Nile Valley. Monumental entrances protect the town at the mouths of its border walls. One of the main structures in its entrance can only be described as gigantic, measuring 70 meters wide. We can find outside gates with wide alleyways that will later be used by the Kemetic rulers to build a typical Egyptian alleyway similar to the one found in between the Karnak and Luxor temples. In the northern zone of this town, two sizable fronts were erected. Models of these structures are simply impressive. Notice these conic side columns that are similar in function and style to Mandinka architecture. Small temples of very complex layout have also been found with processional pathways leading to ceremonial altars. In 1450 BC, the town was invaded by Thutmose I. The pharaoh proceeded to add Egyptian motifs to the site. That began the Kemetic colonization era of Doukki Gel that would end in the 25th dynasty with King Taharqa. Later on, Thutmose I's daughter, Queen Hatshepsut, rebuilt the town of Doukki Gel. It is interesting to see that even during this Kemetic colonization period, local gods were respected. This was easy, as in many cases, these gods were the same. This confirms the cultural lineage between Kemet, Nubia, and in this case, Doukki Gel. A large cache of objects have also been found, dating back to the Kemetic reconstruction of the town. In this case, the name of Thutmose IV can be found on the relics. As Kemet changed during the Amarna era, various markings have been found that show this influence on the then colonized Doukki Gel. This continued all the way to the 25th dynasty, when King Taharqa reintroduced the distinctive circular architecture with circular motifs and round columns. The Nubian King Taharqa also ordered the construction of various temples throughout the Sudan. Interestingly, these temples all have the same floor plan. The site continued to evolve well into the Meroitic era and retained its significance and distinctive architecture. This site doesn't get the media coverage it really deserves. This is a major find, one that is showing the true ingenuity and technological prowess of the Central African civilizations, the same one that migrated north a millennia before and started what we now call Egypt, thanks to king names. It is at this point that two cultures start to evolve in different directions and separate a people from the same origin into two impressive kingdoms. What Doukki Gel shows is that well into the Bronze Age, civilization from Central Africa already had complex technological and social development that was inherited in multiple forms by the various later civilizations in Black Africa. But most importantly, it shows that more studies have to be done to unearth further archaeological gems deeper in the continent. Here are a few examples of African architecture that have survived long enough to be documented. It is truly a shame that so much of our collective history has been purposely erased. But this should not prevent us from appreciating these gems. Even more, it should give us additional incentive to redouble the archaeological efforts in Africa. If we can find hundreds of millions of dollars to make a box office movie, surely we can contribute towards this effort. At least to do more satellite ground-penetrating radar in key areas of the continent. And this channel is dedicated to that cause. If you want to support our efforts to revitalize African history, consider joining via YouTube or supporting us on Patreon. Don't forget to share and make sure you follow us on Twitter. Join us and see how those who are said to be without history birthed civilization itself.